If I stay too long, just point out the light switch and I'll hit the lights as on my way out. No, I will try not to go over. I'd like to just read a passage real quick out of Psalm 107. Okay, Psalm 107. It's the first two verses of Psalm 107. Am I supposed to put that other mic on?
It'll pick up.
It'll pick it up? Okay. Sounds good. Psalm 107 and the first two verses, and here's what it says. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. Is he good?
Amen.
How good is he? Well, he's just so good. You can't even describe how good he is because he's infinitely good. Give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. Is he a merciful God?
Amen.
Yes, and every one of us is proof of that God is merciful. Verse 2. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. All right, so God is good. His mercy endures forever. And I trust that most of us have experienced his mercy and are redeemed. How many here can say that? Oh, I'm redeemed. I know I'm saved for sure. Okay. Let the redeemed of the Lord do what? Say so. Whom he hath redeemed from the hand of the enemy. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. So who is that talking about? Just the missionaries? Don't think so. I think it's talking about all of us who are redeemed. We have a job to do. We have a job to do. And I know that not everybody is called to be a full-time missionary on a foreign field. I know that. I understand that. But we are all called to share what God has done in our lives with those around us. And to be honest with you, I've got a much easier job than you all have. I really do. Pastor, I pray for you. I pray for all of our supporting pastors because you do have a much more difficult job than we have down in Peru. Because saying so in Peru is not so difficult. People actually listen. People actually listen. And Joe and Anita were down there a few years ago, and you know, people listen down there. They really do. You can pass out a gospel tract, and most of the time people just sit right down on the sidewalk, right there, and read it. We have driven through towns and just thrown gospel tract out the window of the car, or reached out and pluck it out of our hand, and you look in the rearview mirror, and they're sitting down on a rock reading it. That actually is the way it is. That's just, so we have an easier job saying so than you do. But we all have a job to do. However difficult it may be, we still have a job. So we are saying so in Peru. I trust you are saying so here. By the way, Calvary Baptist Church has supported the ministry that God has us involved in Peru for 34 years. Yeah, this church has supported us for 34 years. I don't know how you've put up with us for 34 years, but here we are. So that's quite a long time that you have invested financially and in prayer, that you've invested in the ministry in Peru. And so thank you for that. We really, really do appreciate that. As you can see in the video, God is doing a work, and he's doing a work that only he can do. So please don't understand this as me taking credit for it because we don't deserve the credit. Only God deserves the credit because only he can do the kind of work that he has done over the last 4 years in Peru. And we just feel like we are privileged to be a part of what God has been doing down there. And so as I mentioned the last time I was here, and you probably don't remember a word I said back then except maybe hello, but we were needing to change locations. We'd been working in the altitude and the church in Aring, but because of my health, we needed to look at lower elevations because of the constant migraines and all of that. And so the Lord just put it on our hearts to join Pastor Rolando and his wife, Gladys, down there in Kiteni in the jungle. Now, Rolando and Gladys had already been there for 5 years. Okay, they'd already been in Kiteni for 5 years. But they were really, really struggling. You see, Kiteni is a boom town. And I can remember just not that many years ago, 15, 18 years ago, we'd drive through Kiteni on the way to some other location where we have another church. And Kiteni was just a wide spot in the road. That's all it was. Now Kiteni is quite a large town and has a lot of, all of the modern conveniences, including electricity and running water and everything like that. But Kiteni is a boom town. Just basically in the last few years, Kiteni grew from being a wide spot in the road to being quite a town because of the natural gas that they've discovered in the area. And so all of these companies that the government has contracted have gone into Kiteni to put in the pipeline, to do the maintenance on it, to put in a road, to do all these things because of the gas, the gas industry that has just suddenly mushroomed in Kiteni. And so when Pastor Rolando and Gladys got to Kiteni, they got there just after the whole boom started. Okay, and they just rented a little place to live. They rented a little place with enough space to have meetings for maybe 15, 20 people. Prices had really started climbing because of the growth in the town and all of that. But they invited me to go down and speak for their very first meeting that they had back then. And so basically, in that sense, we've been involved since the beginning in the Kiteni ministry, but they were doing the ministry down there, and people were getting saved. People were getting baptized. The church was growing. The problem is that most of the growth was not local people. Okay, most of the people who got saved and followed the Lord in baptism were people that had come into town because of the gas industry. Okay, so they were under contract with whatever company they were working with, and so they'd come into town for 3 months, 6 months, however long their contract was for, and during that time, they would get saved, they'd get baptized, but as soon as their contract was over, they had to go wherever else they were sent, or to find another job, and so they would go back home. Some of them were from other countries, from Brazil and other places, and so they'd go back home, and so the church would grow, but then when those contracts were up, then the church would shrink because there wasn't a lot of local church. I'm not saying there wasn't any. There was some, but not a lot of local growth. So when we got down there, Pastor Rolando was very discouraged because he would reach people for the Lord and the people would get saved, but then they'd leave, and you can hope that they get involved in a local church wherever they went to, but anyway, he was just discouraged because there wasn't a lot of fruit to show locally for 5 years of ministry down there. So when we joined him in Kiteni and started working together, we started kind of concentrating on the local people. And of course, we needed a property, which the Lord provided, and he provided the funds to be able to buy that. And the property already had a 2-story house on it. It was actually 2 lots that were right together. And there was a 2-story house on one lot, and then the lot right next to it was just a vacant lot. It had a little shack on it that needed to be torn down. And the lot, according to the title, was 13 meters deep, okay? Each lot was 7 meters wide by 13 meters deep. Well, the house was 13 meters deep, but the empty lot next to it was only 6 meters deep. And so we learned right then that to get to our 13 meters, you have to work for it. and you have to dig into the mountain, which we did. And God allowed us to do that. But so anyway, we bought the property. We're still renting a space across the street to be able to have our services and all of that. And then COVID hit. And I still remember the Sunday night that was announced. We finished our service. on Sunday evening and came outside, and people were abuzz about the government restrictions that that the next day, 6 o'clock curfew, and nobody would be allowed in the streets after that. And during the daytime, when you could leave the house, there were restrictions about that, and those just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And so at that point, we just wondered, what is God doing here, and what are we doing here? I was actually very, very discouraged. Rolando, who kind of tends to get discouraged quite easily, he was discouraged. But let's wait it out and see what happens. Well, 2 weeks turned into 4, and then 4 weeks turned into 8, and all in all, it turned into 2 years of very, very strict measures for the country. So, and some of you followed us during that time, but that first night when we at 6 o'clock curfew, and normally 6 o'clock the streets are buzzing because it's cool. It's the cool of the evening. People are out on the streets and walking around, and that's when the town kind of comes alive. But 6 o'clock, we went out on the roof of our house and looked down off of the roof onto the street, and all you could see was a lot of soldiers and a lot of police, all heavily armed. And if anybody stepped out their door, they would literally haul them off to jail right there. And that was happening on the street. So we're looking down and just wondering what in the world is going on. And then we looked across the street at our neighbors' houses, and everybody was out on their roof. Just like we were doing the same thing we're doing, looking down on the street, right? So we look across the street, and all of our neighbors are out there. And so the next day, one of our neighbors came up to me and he said, "Hermano Timo, Brother Tim, you know how to pray, right?" I said, "What? I think so." So he said, "Well, I have a little sound system. It's really old, but it kind of sort of works. And if I let you use it, could you set it up on your roof? And tonight, when everybody's out on the roof, because they're going to be out on the roof because they're used to walking the streets at night, and now they can't, so they're going to be outside. Could you pray for our country and for our town?" I said, "Absolutely, bring it over." So he brought the thing over, and we set it up. And I mean, there were cockroaches coming out of the speaker. It was a mess. It was a mess. The microphone, just like this, was rusty, but it kind of worked. Okay, it worked better than nothing at all. So we set it up. So that night, the first thing I did is I pulled up the national anthem on my cell phone, the Peruvian national anthem. Okay, not the Star Spangled Banner. I pulled up the Peruvian national anthem on my cell phone, and I put my cell phone up to that microphone and played the national anthem, and everybody started singing along, right? And so that kind of broke the ice a little bit. And so then I said, folks, I think we really need God's help during this time. Would you agree? And everybody, yes, yes, yes. I said, so I would like to lead us in prayer. I'd like to pray that God would give us peace, that he would give us wisdom, that he would give us his protection, and that he would make himself known to all of us, to this town of Kiteni, that he is a real God and that he is a powerful God. And everybody just said, yes, please pray. So I prayed. Well, I thought that was the end of it, right? I thought that was the end of it. Well, the next night they were all up there again. And so we did the same thing again. Well, then my wife says, Tim, you should just bring your guitar out and start singing. And I thought, are you serious? I don't even know these people. But she said, you do it all the time. Okay, so I pulled the guitar out and I set up the microphone for that, and so started playing the guitar and started singing. Well, then people wanted to learn the songs, and so we printed up song sheets, passed them out to all of our neighbors, passed out Bibles to our neighbors, those of them who wanted them. And there are people who were out on their rooftop just about every single service for the next 2 years. And God worked through that. The last service we had before COVID restrictions came into effect, the last service we had, that last Sunday night, we had 9 people. The first service we had in our new building indoors, where we could meet indoors without any restrictions, we had 90. Only God can do that, folks. I can't do that. I couldn't have planned it out. I couldn't have written it out on paper. You couldn't have planned it out. That's just what God did, because God is going to do things his way for his glory. And that's what he did. That's what he did. And so all of a sudden, this church planting thing is viable. I mean, it's really looking pretty good. And so now we're all encouraged, and God was really working, and the building went up, and God provided for that, and then provided for the expansion. Remember the digging on the first floor? Well, we were told by the authorities that on the second floor, if we wanted to, we could dig in more and be able to gain some more land for the second floor. So the first floor is actually 14 meters wide by 13 meters deep. The second floor is 14 meters wide by 18 meters deep. The third floor is 14 meters wide by 21 meters deep. Well, now we just did the fourth floor, and the fourth floor is 14 meters wide by 25 meters deep. So now we have the facility to be able to actually do something in Kiteni, and God has provided, and God has worked, and God has filled the building. And for the larger meetings that we have, like weddings or anything like that, we can go up there on that fourth floor and spread out a little bit and have some fresh air. And so God has done just an amazing work in Peru. And thank you for being a part of that. And we praise God for faithful churches who have gotten behind us in this whole Kiteni effort and project. I just want to share real quick the story of the testimony of one lady, and she was in the picture. Her name is Flora. We have a daughter named Flora, but this is a different Flora, okay? Yeah. Flora lived directly across the street. I mean, literally, you could come out our door and go straight into her door across the street, okay, right across the street from our house. And Flora was known as the meanest person in town, literally. She was mean. She was mean to everybody. Her husband at one time had been the mayor of the town, and so she felt entitled to be mean to anybody she wanted to be mean to, and she was, and she really knew how to do that up. She was mean to us. She was mean to Barb. She would just say things that were very hurtful and everything. She'd kind of say it behind your back, but just loud enough for you to hear and that kind of thing. And I mean, I've seen her come very close to being violent with people and everything. She was a very, very mean person. Every time you'd say, hi, Señora Flora, buenas tardes. Señora Flora, buenos días. She'd, that was her answer, okay? She didn't answer very, very kindly because she didn't know how to be. Well, that first night that we went up on our roofs during COVID, I looked across the street, and the first person I saw right across, same level, 3 streets up, right across from us is, guess who? Flora. And so, as always, I said, Señora Flora, buenas noches. And for the first time ever, she said, Señor Timo, buenas noches. Very kindly, I thought. Okay, and that night, I said, Lord, every time you bring her to my mind, I will pray for her salvation. I will pray for her salvation. And I started praying. And every night, she was up there. Eventually, we just went to Sundays and Wednesdays, but every Sunday, every Wednesday, she'd be up there. There were a few that she missed because her son lived further into the jungle, and she would sometimes travel to go see her son. But most of the time, she was up there. She was the first one out there. She was the first one to have her song sheet, to have her Bible out there. And she was really, really following. And opportunities to talk to her, she would listen. She was very kind. Well, when we were eventually allowed to have those services on our rooftop, open air, because they were open air, people were allowed to come eventually. She stayed on a roof, right? She was still on a roof, and so we kind of had to angle the pulpit so that you could see the people sitting on our roof and see people across the street as well. And so we would preach, and Pastor Rolando, one Sunday, he said, we've kind of lost this custom because of COVID, but tonight we're going to receive an offering. And so the people were, okay, let's do this. He explained, he says it's no obligation, but we are told that we need to be generous with God's work because everything is His in the first place, and we're just giving back to God a little bit of what He's given us. And he explained it very kindly, and so we took up an offering. As the service was ended and we were finishing in prayer, the doorbell rang, okay? And so I looked out over the edge to see who was down there, and it was Flora. Okay, it was Flora. And so I go running down the stairs, and I open the door, and she says, Hermano Timo. Now it wasn't Señor Timo, now it was Hermano Timo, brother Tim, right? And she says, Hermano Timo, I just wanted to bring my offering. God was doing something in that woman's life. Well, she came to the Lord, and she is following the Lord. She is one of the most active people in the church. Anytime we have anything special, she's the first one to volunteer to cook, to kill the chickens, peel the chickens, boil the chickens, and fix them the way people like them. And she's a very, very good cook. And God is just really using her to encourage people. She's cooked for the whole work crew. I mean, she's just an amazing lady. And the transformation has become so obvious to the town. People who aren't even saved are asking us, what happened to Flora? Well, let me tell you what happened to Flora. And so God has just been very, very good. And we're thankful for what he has done. Please continue to pray for the ministry down there. Pray for Pastor Rolando. He's not discouraged anymore. In fact, he is a national missionary with our National Mission Board. But at this point, Barb and I are praying and wondering what God is going to do in the future for that ministry. And to be honest with you, the town loves those people, loves Rolando and Gladys and their children. And we are wondering if it might be God's will to have Rolando be the first full-time pastor of the church, because the church just really loves him. And eventually we will move on. As a national missionary, normally he would too, but we're wondering if that's what God might be preparing them for, because we've looked for other people to be able to eventually step in and to be able to train up to take over that ministry. And God has not provided that person yet, so pray concerning that. Thank you for praying for our family. You know, being in Peru, far away from most of our children is not an easy thing, but missionaries have done it for a few centuries now. And so by God's grace, we can do it. We are thankful that our 5 grandchildren are in Peru. Okay? Now, the closest ones are 8 hours away from us. The furthest ones are about 18 hours away from us. But once in a while we get to see our grandkids. That's nice. But pray for our family that God would just continue to work in our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives, and that they would love the Lord more and more. We are empty nesters now, so it's kind of like going back to the way we started. We were 12 years alone before we had children. I don't know if we're going to be 12 years alone without children, or it'd be nice if the Lord gave us a few more than that. But whatever the Lord wants to do with us, that's